Welcome back to The Loop, your weekly dose of all things property management. I'm your host, Colin Stewart, and each week we're going to dive into the latest trends, strategies, and stories shaping the property management world. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, we're here to provide insights, expert interviews, and practical tips to help you navigate the ever-evolving landscape of property management. Sean, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Colin.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you. I'd love you to kind of paint a picture for the listeners and talk to me about like midterm rentals. Because the first thing I thought of was like, wow, it's something that only happens every 4 years. That doesn't make a ton of sense. But
For sure. Yes. Yeah.
So what is a midterm rental? What are the different kind of niches within it?
Yeah. No, and that's a great, and that's like people think like there's been like a weather catastrophe, that's like the only thing that would kind of require an insurance stay, and just kind of like take Texas as an example. This happens, somewhere between 1 to 2.5% of like the order of magnitude, right, of insurance relocations that need to take place. It's somewhere between 1 to 2.5% of owner occupied households in Texas will actually have an insurance claim that results in them needing to relocate for a period of time while that restoration work takes place. So now, and that varies obviously by state, the level of kind of weather exposure, but you'd be surprised, right? Most of these are not weather event driven. They're not like CATs, as the kind of industry calls it, catastrophic events. And so it's law of large numbers events. It's, pipes bursting, it's dishwashers popping open, it's, automations failing, right, on some of the more modern, appliances. It's, kind of like as craftsmanship, and the quality of homes and like materials has been on the decline, and some, and kind of like a wide variety of quality of home builders, that can result in like more claims taking place, and just more of these sort of failures and events like that. So that's kind of like on the insurance housing, like what is the size of the demand there? But to answer your question about what is the, how do we like think about midterm rental? How do we define that category? 30 plus day stays, right? So that's like kind of the length of time, typically fully furnished properties or the ability to get them furnished. And typically utilities are included as well. So sort of like Airbnb. So think short-term rental, right? Less than 30-day stays. It could be a similar product, right? You would ideally have it be a little bit like higher quality, like furnishings, so that they would be, comfortable to live in for months at a time, especially if you had like a family, if you're speaking specifically about the insurance side. And then, this could also be furnished apartments, right? So like corporate housing is, like really within this midterm category. And it depending on your audience, right? Like we don't, I'm saying midterm versus short term, versus corporate housing, right? There are folks that have been working in corporate housing for decades that are not using the term midterm rental, right? So it's a little bit of a newer term to try to like lump all these together. They each kind of have nuances within in reality, especially as it relates to like how they're sourced, the procurement process, and the requirements in order to like be a provider to the folks that need to stay there and the companies that place them. So a lot of kind of unique workflows and kind of like nuance that you're only going to really see when you're inside that industry or that niche. But just to kind of name like going off of that further riffing is, travel nursing or, what do they call it? It's not, travel nursing is an example, but there's also, doctors that are in that mix and kind of other, hospital staff. And like sometimes these assignments are like, these assignments are typically 13 weeks. And I think that's probably the most popular category that exists for folks referring to midterm rentals. If you search travel nursing housing, like there's influencers in the space that are talking about it, promoting it, and same with insurance as well. But yeah, so there's that one, and then I'll kind of rattle off a couple more, and we can chop this however we want. But there's contractor housing. So for like a big project outside of there's a new fab is being developed, right? Okay, this is a 5-year project, plus project, tens of thousands of workers that are going to be there for a period of time. Where are they all going to stay? Especially if you're, kind of building this, depending on where you're building it. So that's like kind of a flexible midterm rental. An electrician may be there for a period of time. Folks will be there for a period of time. So that's like another kind of category that, again, it's related, kind of gets lumped in. But I think like the intersection of all these things is furnished, right? It's like someone who's not bringing their furniture typically. It's
Mhm.
typically utilities are included, not always, but typically, and needs, some level of like, and really, and that honestly, that's probably like the intersection of all of them is just like furnished and like some utilities are included typically, doesn't
Mhm.
have to be. And then the rest are just kind of like unique to the demand channel.
It does sound like quite a different demand channel for each one of those, And when I think about like a short-term rental and like what you would need to do in order to market and advertise that versus selling to an insurance company that's doing relocations or to a corporate entity that's relocating a bunch of folks temporarily, like it sounds like very different go-to-market channels for each one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Very different. And, that's like one of the like frankly, like that's the biggest opportunity is understanding how to find those demand channels and market within them and develop relationships within those channels.
Mhm.
It's very there is not like there's the landscape today is like there's like Furnish Finder, right, where folks that own properties list the properties, but it's really like kind of like a listing place.
Mhm.
So you kind of think about like Craigslist, but like for furnished, properties. So, folks can kind of search on there, but it's like, and then there's some folks using, Airbnb for that too, right? But like Airbnb is really more like built for vacation rentals. It
Mhm.
kind of has the ability to like book for someone else, like a book for others feature, but it's not really built for that.
Yeah.
And one of the other big challenges that exist there is folks like calendars are not configured in such a way to allow for a 3-month booking, right? If you flip open a property, any given property on Airbnb, you're going to see a scattering of 2-day bookings here. 3 weeks later, there's a 3-day booking. A
Mhm.
week later, there's a week booking. So like you could never really book that as a midterm, rental. I need that for 2 months. And then especially if I need some flexibility on that, well, okay, that's not going to really work because someone needs to block their calendar. And the flexibility is more so, that's not in every case, right? Like
Mhm.
a corporate relo is typically going to be like a defined length of stay. A travel nurse assignment is typically going to be a defined length of stay.
Mhm.
But some do require that flexibility, especially in the case of insurance housing, where, it's subject to restoration. What is the timeline for the restoration? Anyone who's worked with a contractor knows like that timeline is not always 100%. It's not 100% confidence interval. It
Mhm.
can move a little bit. And then there's also, well, how much is the adjuster actually approving at any given moment in time? And so they may not approve the full length of stay. So you need to be able to kind of chunk it out and extend and oftentimes extend multiple times. So,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I mean, just going back to the kind of demand channels and how you find those folks. I mean, there's I kind of spoke to the Airbnb side. So there's some folks using that to search and book, but like again, there's sort of structural problems with the inventory there
Mhm.
based on that calendar piece, as well as just kind of the inability to know like what's the quality of the home, right? I need to be able to maybe like tour it before I go and like commit to stay there for a couple months, which like
Mhm.
Airbnb doesn't really facilitate. And then, okay, I can go on Furnish Finder and I can shoot a lot of like messages to a lot of like hosts or landlords. I don't really know if it's available. I don't really know, if there's not like a live calendar. It's just kind of a messaging, component. And there's also kind of a problem where a lot of folks are on there and just kind of like messaging landlords where, you don't know if they're serious, right? You're having to respond a lot. If you miss it, you don't respond quick enough, you missed it.
It's
There's
a lot of work.
it's a lot of work, some challenges there, some big inefficiencies. And then there's some like traditional like corporate relocation platforms that exist and portals that exist, but they're RFQ driven. Someone's posting an RFQ. They're saying, "Hey, here are kind of my needs and my requirements." Folks are responding, right? So again, inefficient, really like traditional. How that has always happened. It's been an
Mhm.
RFQ process, and okay, great. It's a move from email based to like a portal based. but there's still some structural limitations with that, right? Well, why can't I just like see the actual price before I submit my RFQ, and like are the numbers that are coming back to me like actually the best pricing, or are they being like, marked up in any way? Does it depend on who is the person submitting the RFQ, the nature of it? And then another very, very big challenge is the respondent to that RFQ, the person putting the bid back, do they actually control that inventory? Or are they going and doing a lease arbitrage strategy, which is very, very common in this space. So that is a cost that adds cost, right, to that bid, versus like a direct provider isn't going to have the same cost structure versus having another party in the middle who's actually kind of marking that up. So some very interesting kind of like structure, market structure nuances when you really drill down and get, and you start being a participant in these markets.
Given the unique complexities of the kind of midterm rental space, how are you thinking about custom tooling versus off-the-shelf software?
It's a great question. How much time does the team have? And that's like compressing. But how much time does a team have to develop and maintain custom software versus what is the cost? How much more quickly, you know, how big is the business problem, right? How big is the outcome going to be? How quickly do we need it? And what is the cost of off the shelf? And then like, do we have the talent? Is the talent, there to go build that and maintain it or not on that specific problem? And that's oftentimes the bottleneck, the latter.
I find the maintenance is always the trick. Is like as somebody who's written, in the early part of my career, and I don't want to stress too much that I actually wrote this. I copy pasted a bunch of macros together to do this one lead function at a big company, and I'm pretty confident they used that for a while. But like once that thing broke, somebody updated Excel and the version changed and something stopped working, I didn't even know how to fix it. And so I think, and this was a long time ago, back when macros running in Excel were a thing. I couldn't imagine going off the shelf, have somebody, vibe code something and then they leave and you're like, hey, so how do we maintain this thing? Like, where's it even hosted? Where are all the keys? Where's this? Where's that? How do we fix it if it breaks? And so that's gotta factor into your build versus buy decision.
Yes. Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Well, and especially as we're like, I'm in an advisor role, at TCH today. And so, it's really incumbent on the management team and the leadership team there to be maintaining these things. And, if they want to make that decision to like develop versus, and choose to maintain it, I've been through all those cycles personally. And I know, I can one shot something and then, it can work for a use case. It requires, it requires a very high level of organization and the ability to like prioritize and reprioritize given the very dynamic business that is property management. Ultimately, right, like the thing that drives business is revenue. And so, if that's at risk and you're deep in a rabbit hole, vibe coding something and trying to, figure out something that may be like fun and stimulating, it's not, and so that's a challenge, especially at like when you're trying to be very efficient with your resources and the talent that is out of business. And so, but yes, yeah, I totally understand.
Amazing. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing more. We'll include a link to TCH and Radius in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on, Sean. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Colin.
Thanks to everybody for listening. We'll catch you all next time.